Hello, everyone, and this is Mr. Simone now with a review or video for Ronald Reagan and his presidency. Please remember, in about 15 minutes, I'm going to try to sum up some of the main aspects of his administration. I cannot in any way cover everything that ever happened in an 8-year time period. So please don't hold it against me if there are things that I don't mention. But of course, in class, I'll have much more to say when we start our activity. Nice little first slide here for you. Please remember Ronald Reagan was a Republican. Ronald Reagan was a Republican. When I mentioned Reagan Democrats, I was trying to explain to you how many Democrats crossed over to vote for Ronald Reagan, our 40th president. And some of these pictures here, people were really clamoring for a return for Reagan in 2016. This cartoon down on the left, as often as the Republicans could during the debates for the nomination, they mentioned Reagan's name, so that's mocking that. And even Obama, this is an interesting article in Time magazine, what he could learn from Ronald Reagan. All right, so who is this guy, Ronald Reagan? He was born in Illinois and was a very impressive high school student who was an award-winning athlete and acted in the school plays. He then went on to Eureka College, majored in economics. His first job was as a sportscaster on a radio show in Iowa. Then he received a 7-year contract to work for Hollywood and became a very well-known actor at the time. He is, or until Donald Trump became president, he was our only divorced president. His first marriage to Jane Wyman ended after, I think, maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And then he remarried Nancy Davis, who became Nancy Reagan. And during this time in Hollywood, just be aware that he was involved in helping the government to find out which actors may have been connected with the Communist Party. But I'll save that for later in the year. And Barry Goldwater, who some people view as Ronald Reagan before Reagan, meaning that he was a conservative during a time in the 60s when the nation just wasn't ready for conservatism. But he helped give a very impressive speech for Barry Goldwater at the 64 Republican Convention. But Ronald Reagan's most significant political experience would be the 2 times that he served as the governor of California. Now, let's get to the presidential election. He did try to get the Republican nomination on 2 attempts before 1980, and I find the one in 1976 particularly interesting since Gerald Ford, who is considered to be a less than impressive president, actually defeated Reagan for the Republican nomination. But in 1980, Ronald Reagan finally broke through, and he defeated Jimmy Carter in that election, 489 to 49. And on that day, we all know, January 20th, 1981, many things happened. One of those being that your former teacher, Ms. Canone, was born, and 52 hostages were released probably minutes after Reagan had given his inauguration speech. These hostages were they were held for 444 days. One of the worst examples of a terrorist act at that time. However, the fact that they were released was a blessing to everyone in the United States. There is a conspiracy where some believe that the Reagan team may have tried to delay the release of these hostages, but Congress never found any evidence for that. 2 months into Reagan's presidency, he was shot by John Hinckley Jr., and I'm not sure if you can see it, but that is John Hinckley Jr. right here at a Subway in Williamsburg, Virginia. And that Subway is actually right here next to the Starbucks that I go to when I visit my relatives in Williamsburg, Virginia, who live in the same place as John Hinckley's mother, who now lives there with his mother because he has been released as of a couple of months ago. And when he shot Reagan, he said he was doing so because he was in love with this actress, Jodie Foster. And now these green lines, I'm not happy that it's thick because it's looking foolish. But this, anyway, is Reagan on his inauguration, and that is Jimmy Carter in the background. Any questions on that, please feel free to ask them in class. Okay, so now let's focus on Reagan's economic policy, which is what most historians like to study. Reagan was a proponent of supply-side economics. This is the belief that if we lower taxes He lowered taxes on many people, but if we lower taxes on the wealthy and we provide them with more money to spend, this will encourage either spending or investment, but will also hopefully trickle down to the lower classes. So the concept of supply-side economics, or Reaganomics, was a major factor of Reagan's economic policy. So that top tax rate went from 70% down to 50%, and then they actually lowered it to 28% for the remaining years of his administration. These are not the only taxes that he cut. He also cut the capital gains tax. I know some of you were confused by that, but he lowered taxes on people when you make a profit, a dividend from an investment, even from like a house sale. He lowered that rate. He lowered the rate of the inheritance tax. He lowered the rate of the gift tax. And something that would be very important for you to know, he lowered the corporate tax rate. So Reagan clearly was a tax cutter. Please don't think he cut every tax. I'll explain that momentarily. People who dislike his policies believe that the trickles never came down. They believe that what really happened is that the gap between the rich and the poor only widened. So that's the debate on Reagan's economic policies. I like this cartoon because when we learned about FDR and the New Deal, far more federal government spending. And now, for Reagan, it really is the emphasis on providing more authority to the state governments. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. All right, we're going to continue with Reagan. I didn't know this, actually. When I talked to you guys about me putting money away through my paychecks, that's an IRA, and I didn't realize that Reagan was the first one to create this. So these accounts are an incentive for people to invest because you don't have to pay taxes when you invest the money up front. So that's something that he was also doing to stimulate economic development. Now, you have to be able to pay for all these tax cuts. So Reagan did cut a lot of money on domestic programs, and that's important for you to know. But he did not cut defense spending. Remember, we were involved in the Cold War with the Soviets, so a lot of people say that because of these cuts in programs, but increasing defense spending, our deficits went up, that the national debt started to increase during Reagan's time. Here's the one that I like to emphasize the most. Even though Reagan cut taxes tremendously, he didn't cut all taxes. He increased the Social Security tax as a way to help to fund Social Security. So when we talk about ways to fix Social Security today, that could be one example. He also raised the gas tax. Yes, that's right. Something I talked to you guys about 2 days ago. He did want to increase the tax on gas, and that money is used to fund infrastructure. Please keep those two things in mind. However, he definitely focused on deregulation of businesses, large businesses, small businesses, industry. That is a very conservative economic way of thinking. Now, probably one of his more controversial decisions was the one to fire air traffic controllers who went on strike. And he believed that they were violating their contract. These are people that are trying to make sure that we keep our air passengers safe. I didn't know until yesterday that was one of the only unions that supported Reagan in the 1980 presidential election. And here's just an evaluation early on. The first 2 years of Reagan's presidency did not see the economic improvement that people were expecting. Please remember, changes don't happen right away. It did not happen until 1983, where inflation started to go down and people start to see the benefits of his programs. All right, so now we go to some foreign affairs. And I told you Reagan definitely put enormous money into defense spending and building up the military during the Cold War. When we learn about foreign policy, you're going to hear about him saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. That was during a time when the Soviet Union was starting to move away from communism, and a lot of people credit Reagan with contributing to the decline of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. But we'll learn that during foreign policy. He had put money into a defense system that they called the Strategic Defense Initiative, the ability to shoot down missiles in the air I remember one year students were fighting and debating on whether or not we even have the capacity to do this. Obviously, I don't think I have the answer to that. But critics who didn't like the plan, they just referred to it as Star Wars, which is a movie I don't like. I know that that's going to bother some of you, but hopefully you at least appreciate my effort and my honesty. Now, some classes learned about this, others didn't. A terrible terrorist attack in 1983. We had an attack on our embassy in Lebanon. 63 people were killed. And then a few months later, the one that more people know about, our Marines were attacked. There were 241 Marines who were killed in this follow-up attack. Reagan pulled our Marines out of Lebanon. Now, some people think that maybe we should have attacked Lebanon, but that was not his decision. Instead, in an unrelated incident, he ordered an attack on the Caribbean island of Grenada. And that was because there was a pro-communist coup taking place. Remember, the 80s was a time where anything that we could do to stop communism was our policy. Supporters of Reagan believed that he did the right thing to continue to squelch that movement, but critics would say that he was trying to distract from the fact that we just suffered a defeat in Lebanon. And those pictures should be self-explanatory. All right, so now we get to 1984, and there's a lot of red there, an awful lot of red. That is because Ronald Reagan destroyed Walter Mondale in the 1984 election, 525-13. Only Minnesota, Mondale's home state, and Washington, D.C. went to the Democrats. For those of you that like a little trivia, this was the first time a female ran as a vice president on a major party ticket. Her name was Geraldine Ferraro, and she was from New York. And the second time, of course, was Sarah Palin. So now we finish up with the Iran-Contra affair. And I know I tried to do this in class, but I'm not sure if everybody understood it. I have a more detailed image that I found here, and then a very basic image here. So the basic image is weapons for hostages. That's what the trade was. We sold weapons to Iran. Israel helped facilitate the sale, and then the money went to Nicaragua to help the Contras fight against the communists and the Sandinistas in that civil war. That's the simple weapons for cash and hostages deal. If you know it like that, you should be okay. The more specific explanation is that Congress initially asked to send money to the Contras, but Congress said, totally got that wrong. The Reagan administration, the CIA, asked to send money to the Contras, and Congress said no. I should delete that, but I don't have time to do it right now. This was the Boland Amendment. The Congress said we will not be funding the Contras. A good reason may have been that the Contras might have been involved in the sale of cocaine. That's a possibility. Some people speculate. Anyway, at the same time, there are hostages who are being held in Lebanon. So the secret deal that was orchestrated by, we don't know officially, but Oliver North is one of the people. John Poindexter was another. In the close circle of, advisors to Ronald Reagan, they sold weapons to Iran. Now, you might say, why would they be selling weapons to Iran? Iran was in a civil war. No, I'm making a lot of mistakes today. Iran was in a war with Iraq, so obviously needed weapons. We sold weapons to Iran because Iran said that it could help get the hostages released, and that is exactly what happened. Hostages returned. However, that money was brokered by Israel, and now, after the arms were delivered to Iran, the money was funneled down to the Contras in Nicaragua. I actually think you guys all understand this, and I'm just speaking too long. But Oliver North was one of the people interrogated for this. Like I said, John Poindexter was another. The ultimate, what you want to think of, the ultimate ending to this is, did Reagan know? And if he did, do you still support what happened? Did Reagan not know? And if he didn't, do you blame him for being a little bit more aloof about what was happening in his administration? I don't think anybody today has a final answer on this, but this really determines how, I think out of all the issues, this one really divides a lot of people on whether they like Reagan as a president or dislike Reagan as a president. As some people said in class today, I don't see what's wrong with it. I mean, he did two things that were good, but other people say that it was violating the Constitution. So that is I kept it at about 15 minutes. There's so much more I wish I could say, but I hope that you enjoy this. I tried to be as fair as possible. Here, some people think he's the greatest president. Other people think he's the beginning of the downfall of America. I did measure both of these pictures, and they're the same square number of inches, so don't think I'm favoring one side or the other. Should also just share with you that toward the end of Reagan's life, he did suffer from Alzheimer's disease, which is obviously very sad and debilitating, and I wish we would find a cure for that. But I will tell you more about him personally in class, and I'll have some quotes for you, some very funny quotes, enjoyable ones. I feel bad for anybody that's not in my class watching this. I probably should have said more. I forgot to say how in 1980, during that election, his famous line for Jimmy Carter was, a recession is when your neighbor loses his job, a depression is when you lose your job, and a recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his job. So I'll end on that note. I'm really excited for the next couple of days. I feel like we're going to have a nice evaluation of Ronald Reagan's presidency, and hopefully you guys feel like you've learned a lot about this man. Have a great day. Talk to you guys soon.